Thanks everybody for coming to our Global Digital Democracy Showcase. I'm Rosalind Fuller, and I'm the Managing Director of the Solonian Democracy Institute in Dublin. And as that name would indicate, we are a group of people devoted to democracy. But what differentiates us from a lot of other organizations in this field is that we're much more research focused, and our activities spend a lot of the time getting really engaged with the processes on the ground. So before we begin today's session, I'd just like to take a few minutes to define what we mean by digital democracy. So not everything digital is democracy. Democracy means people power. And what often we have today is a lot of confusion that equates parts of democracy with the entirety of democracy. And in particular, we see a conflation of social media with democracy. So this idea that Twitter or doing something online or blogging is digital democracy. Of course, democracy, like any other form of government, has a lot to do with communication. However, it's not just about pointless screaming or letting off steam and going away. Democracy is a method of government, which means it's a method of decision making, and that requires structure and clarity. So democracy also isn't just about deciding pre-decided outcomes. It's a method of non-partisan decision-making. There's not a very strong relationship between democracy and any particular culture, and there can certainly be democracies that are more illiberal or have different value systems than ours does. There is a correlation between being liberal-ish and democratic over like the very long term, but there's a very damaging idea as well that democracy is just about railroading through certain values. That itself is actually kind of anti-democratic. So to give an example, we had a referendum in 2018 in Ireland that legalized abortion. That was obviously democracy at work. But the previous referendum that cemented illegalizing abortion in the Constitution in 1983 was also democracy. And this is very important. Democracy and the rules of democracy need to be fair in order to maintain their credibility. Finally, democracy is not window dressing. We're definitely not just doing this as an empty formula, as something where we can say, well, we checked that box and there was some kind of nebulous involvement that no one really understands, or we half-heartedly went through the motions or tried to second guess what people want. That's again not what we're about. We're about putting people at the center of government and giving them the possibility to affect the world around them. So democracy isn't just feeling like you affected something, it is affecting something. And to do otherwise would be selling ourselves short, because what we can do out there, offline and online, is already pretty amazing. We are really experiencing a system change from the mechanical to the digital era, and that brings a lot of possibilities with it. At SDI, we track all forms of electronic citizen engagement. And that can be participatory budgeting, like for example, Better Reykjavik in Iceland, which has been running an online participatory budget for 10 years now. Or it could be South Dublin County Council here in Ireland, which is in its third year of online participatory budgeting. Participatory budgeting was developed in Brazil about 30 years ago as a real bottom-up movement, and it spread all over the world, involving people to a greater or lesser extent in financial decisions in their communities, or in some cases, even their whole country. It could be online voting, which can take all kinds of different forms, voting in elections and referendums, setting policies within parties, and voting in unions or shareholder meetings. So for example, the 5-Star Movement in Italy has been setting policy and voting on party decisions online for many years, and Estonia has had internet voting for 10 years, over 10 years. It could also be designing infrastructure. For example, a community center or a park in a way that provides people with information and opportunities to participate fully and on an equal footing with others. So we really only need to think about what the pandemic would have been like if it had happened 20 years ago to see how much technology has affected our lives and our communication. The future is a lot closer than a lot of people believe. And we're very fortunate to have 3 panelists, very knowledgeable panelists, who are going to share their experience designing and using these digital tools with you. So we're not just having a commentary on something, you're actually hearing firsthand from the people who are at the cutting edge of this process, which is, I think, a very unique and important opportunity. Each of our panelists is going to give a short presentation about their work, and we'll follow that up with a Q&A and discussion. So our first panelist is Tim Booker from Canada. Tim was CEO of Civil Space until it was acquired by ZenCity in 2021, and he's now head of Civil Space at ZenCity. And Civil Space is a community engagement platform that has been used by local governments and governmental bodies to include citizens in various forms of policymaking. We'll be telling you a little bit more about exactly how that works. Our second speaker is Kadri Org, who is responsible for the day-to-day management of Rahvaalgatus.ee. Rahvaalgatus is a citizens' initiative portal which allows individuals to submit collective proposals to the parliament and local governments via an online platform. So the proposals could be for suggestions for new ideas for laws and policies, or changes to existing laws and policies. And it's based on a cluster of regulations that bind the parliament and local government to process those proposals that the citizens submit. And finally, we'll be hearing from Philip Andrea, who's a senior advisor at Voatz. Voatz is an American organization focused on enabling voting via computer and smartphone. And Philip has a long history in the world of digital security. He was one of the 3 executives who launched the development of EMV, the global standard of payment card security, and he's been secretary of the FIDO Alliance, focused on authentication standards. So that's all from me for now. I'd like to hand things over to our first panelist, Tim.
All right, thank you so much, Rosalind. I'm going to share my screen now and just present some introductory slides. All right, can you see my screen okay? Awesome, thanks. So yes, I am Tim. I am the head of Civil Space and director of product at ZenCity. It's really an honor to be here at this digital democracy event. It's really exciting to be here alongside my fellow panelists. I wanted to introduce a little bit about what I do at ZenCity before we get going. So ZenCity is a company that is all about listening to resident voices. And the interesting thing about our organization is we do that in a variety of ways. We do that by listening in places where citizens are already communicating, like in social media, on 311, on Reddit, on news sites. We also go out and proactively gather feedback in a representative way with kind of like recurring survey type materials. And then the piece that I work on is more in the collaborative, explicit space. So that area where we're transparently opening up opportunities for governments and their citizens to collaborate together. And so that tool is called Civil Space. And Civil Space is really differentiated by 4 key things. And I think these are really important as we think about what our relationship is like with our citizens. So the primary client of ZenCity, of Civil Space, is government employees. And while we want to equip and help our friends in government to gather the data they need to make really good decisions, we think the how they gather that information is just as important, because the opportunity that as we go out to our citizen base and engage on really key and important issues to us and to them is that we can actually build more trust. We can build more transparency so that there's actually belief in the solutions that we end up coming up with and that are hopefully going to be long-term and sustainable, versus there are ways that we can do engagement that can be a checkbox exercise, that can seem just like, you know, meeting a compliance need, that don't really show that we value or understand or care about citizen voices and ideas and priorities and concerns. And so Civil Space is all about making process transparent. It's about making the whole thing simple for both staff at government and for participants. It's about making things collaborative so we can actually have citizens and government working together all in a very open space. And it's also about education. It's about making sure that we aren't making it a treasure hunt for our citizens to find information about key topics, but instead we're bringing that all to the table in a consumable, easy way, right alongside where we're gathering feedback together. And so one thing at Civil Space that we deeply care about is about going beyond just making sure that we're opening up an opportunity for some citizens to provide feedback, because there are going to be people who will show up to council meetings. There are going to be people who will show up on any medium, no matter how difficult it is to use. But what we want to do is we want to open the door more broadly to the places where traditionally people haven't engaged. And so there are often groups, whether they are marginalized groups, whether they're groups who haven't participated as strongly in government and democracy processes. And what we are really striving for as we kind of move beyond the great tool set we have into the tool set of the future is to look at how can we make it so more and more individuals who don't feel comfortable, don't feel welcome, or haven't necessarily participated, how can we encourage their participation in a democratic process? Because really good decision-making and good data should be based on everyone in the community, on all different types of people. And one thing that we often heard from our customers, from government types, is this idea that, well, those citizens are really apathetic. Those citizens don't care enough to get engaged. And so what we actually did as an organization, it was about 1.5 years ago, was we endeavored on a research study where we worked with a bunch of community organizations. We're up in Canada, so they were in North America. And what we did is we really tried to reach out to whether it was the LGBTQ community, or whether it was the immigrant community, or the elderly community, or maybe people less familiar with technology. We had about 7 or 8 different groups that we reached out to, and we just started having conversations to really understand what is it that is keeping you from participating. And what we found is that behind the door of apathy, it wasn't actually apathy. There were actually things that were keeping people from participating that were valid barriers that we could then bring into our product and bring back to our clients to say, hey, here's something you can learn from. Here's how you can better involve the whole community. And by no means have we addressed or fixed these issues, but I think as we think about digital democracy, and as we think about the current state of it and where we're going and where the challenges in our world are today, I think these are really great questions that emerge from our research that we all can think about for any process we're creating digitally that really can speak to making sure that our friends from all different types of communities and backgrounds are able to participate, we're able to get their information, and I feel like a valuable part of the process who has agency. And so I'll just go over them quickly. The first question is, am I welcome here? Are there symbols or things at this event or in this digital tool that show that I am welcome as whatever my background or community is, or they're actually the opposite symbols? Are doors open to me? And so that was it was an idea like in the physical space, wheelchair ramps, or, are there ways for people who are visually impaired to participate? Or is the venue open on a certain evening? And we've translated that into digital space with things like, well, what's the multilingual capability? What are the accessibility guidelines? If you think about WCAG 2.1, guidelines, for example, are we making it so as many different people as possible can participate? But we also have to think about issues of trust. And it could be long-term trust issues within a community. It could be someone's coming to a new community and they had issues of trust in that old community. How are we opening up ways or how are we sending signals that are showing that in this space where we're going to collaborate on these key issues, you can trust us? What is the information we're sharing? Where's the transparency? What are the cycles and the ways that we show that we actually have learned from our citizens? And we now want to go back to those to them and say, here's what we're doing because of what we heard. A big thing we also want to address through digital is making sure people don't have to meet this standard of being that citizen. And so for that, we often think about an extroverted person who speaks the language well, who can be really cooperative with authority. And sometimes the people who need to be heard from aren't necessarily going to fit every single one of those boxes. Are we still opening up spaces where people can participate on their time and in a way that is still going to be heard, even if it's not the polished type of presentation that maybe we'd expect or we had expected in days gone by in a town hall meeting? Finally, are there understanding gaps? Are there issues in how the information we're providing feedback is actually being understood by the people who are taking it in? And the biggest and most important one is this even worth it? Am I going to spend 5, 10, 20 minutes at this exercise, maybe even more? Is anything going to happen? Is my opinion going to get listened to? And so there's all sorts of ways that we've tried to embrace in our product to answer these questions so that we show everyone who's participating, yes, this time is valuable because we're going to show you how there's going to be impact based on, and in the past, how there's been impact based upon what we've heard from citizens. But I guess I would just invite, as my opening statement, just talking a bit about civil space within Zen City, that as we think about democracy, we should always be thinking, okay, we want that to be like democratic for everyone. And so that involves inclusion. And there's some really good questions that we can ask ourselves in order to make that possible. So thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And I'll just pass back to you, Rosalind.
Great. Thanks very much, Tim. That was really interesting and exciting. So we'll move on and we'll hear from Kadri now, who's going to tell us a bit about what they've been doing. And then we'll wind up with Philip. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Kadri, and I'm also gonna share my screen. I'm a democracy expert working in an organization called Estonian Cooperation Assembly. And actually, from the last week, I have been on a maternity leave, but I'm really glad that I still have an opportunity to participate in this fascinating event today. Firstly, a few sentences about the organization. The Estonian Cooperation Assembly is a think tank established by the Office of the Estonian President, and the organization core activities are to monitor the issues affecting Estonians' long-term development, develop policy recommendations, and initiatives to promote civil society, and also to promote participatory democracy. And next slide. I'm sorry. Yeah. And since 2016, Estonian Cooperation Assembly has managed and developed the citizen initiative portal called Rahvaalgatus.ee. And to explain the name of the web portal, Rahvaalgatus in Estonian means the citizen initiative. And the web portal allows individuals to submit collective proposals to the parliament and local governments. And these proposals can be suggestions for new ideas for laws and policies, or changes to existing laws and policies. But we see that oftentimes people use it also as a tool to bring up problems in society, the local ones, and also wider questions about different values, and then gather other citizens' support to get this specific issue on the decision makers' table. And the participation portal is based on a cluster of regulations that bind the parliament and local governments to process the proposals. So in fact, it's written in the law in Estonia, which was adopted in 2014, that Parliament has to discuss the initiative with at least 1,000 Estonian citizen signatures. And all qualifying initiatives will be deliberated in parliamentary committees, which are most relevant to this initiative topic. And it's possible to present the signatures both on paper and online, but as Estonia is an e-country where most processes are done online, there is a clear trend and preference towards using digital tools to use and put this law into practice. And just to clarify also that in Estonia, we are using e-signatures, which are legally the same as handwritten signatures. And every person has his own unique e-signatures. So one person can't give 2 or more support votes, as it may happen in many other petition portals, where actually they gather people's emails, Facebook confirmations, or other means in the name of signatures. In the follow-up phase, there are a number of options how the parliament can decide how to process the initiative. But as the topics are very different, what citizens are proposing, then also the feedback which comes are really various. And to bring out some of the impact, of course, the first thing what always is asked is how many laws and regulations are changed to the proposals and initiatives. There are a few of them, but which often happens to stay unnoticed is the impact that actually when simple people or different stakeholders are coming together around the same table with decision makers, and they can on the same level discuss about certain topics and find common understanding, then we as portal managers and promoters of participatory democracy see that this is one of the greatest impact what this has. And one of the success factors, what I can say, what we have since 2016, what we have done as day-to-day managers is that we are constantly gathering feedback, how to make the portal more user-friendly. And as we are so small organization, then we can implement the changes really fast, and probably that's also the reason why more and more people have find their way in Rahvaalgatus portal. And also coming from this feedback side and then gathering the information, 2020 we added a new function to the portal. We saw that many proposals were falling more to local government responsibilities, not where Parliament couldn't decide much because it was out of their scope. So we added an opportunity to draft and submit proposals also to local governments. And this right is also written in the law. This was adopted already in 1993, so almost 30 years ago, but there wasn't overview how many people knew about this right, how much it was actually implemented. And when we made it possible to do it through digital means, we see in leaps and bounds how the numbers have grown in the initiatives, and how many different communities have used this option to send their proposals to different local governments in Estonia. We have 79 local governments, and as now last 1.5 years we have put this into practice. We have actually seen that within this 30 years the law is quite needs renewing, and it's also really nice that the ministry who is in the process of changing the law is actually taking the feedback from us, what we see in practice, what are the in local government side and citizen side. They take it and they are renewing the law so that it's more clear and more citizens friendly. And to give overview of the live statistics as well, how much this portal is used. So from 2016 March till yesterday's evening, so with 6 years, Estonian people have made 385 discussions in the portal. Discussion means that before people can send the proposals to collect signatures, the proposal must be in the discussion phase for at least 3 days. And this helps to calm down the proposals that may be written from the emotions and might not be so well thought through. And also, as I explained before, we are using e-signatures, and when the proposal has made and it's gathering signatures, then any word can't be changed, because all the signatures would have they wouldn't have any legal right then, because people, like, when it's sent to collect signatures, then people can't change any other word. And 2045 initiatives has sent to collect signatures, and just this Wednesday we crossed the symbolic sign of collecting more than 300,000 signatures in the portal. So for 245 different initiatives, people have put within these 6 years more than 300,000 signatures. And in 6 years, 109 proposals have been sent to parliaments and local governments through our portal. And from this 109, 86 are sent to the parliament, and 23 are sent to the local government. But this local government part is developing rapidly. And generally, we have seen a rapid increase in the numbers of initiatives and signatures given within the last years. And it has been our strategic hope and choice that as democratic processes are slow and they need time to settle in society, that the web portal will grow like a snowball within time, and more people will understand its value in time. And we have seen that in our case, it has held true. And that's the case. I'm an overview of our experience.
Great. No, thanks so much. That was really interesting. And I'm sure people will have a lot of questions about how government's working in Estonia. So we'll hand it over to Philip to present about Voatz and the work he's been doing there in the United States.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Tim. And I'm not going to pronounce your first name correctly. Very interesting talks. And I hope what I can share with everybody adds to the conversation. My name is Philip Andre, and I work in the field of payments and in the field of elections and in the field of security. And Philip Andre and Associates has been around since 1984, when I started building trading rooms for large organizations like Shearson Lehman Brothers and Solomon's in both New York and London. What I've displayed in front of you is just an array of a word cloud of subjects that I've been involved in and that I've gotten my head wrapped around. This particular slide does not include that I'm going to talk about today. And what I'm going to talk about today is this question of democracy and this question of how do I participate in that democracy. And in most democracies, we have some kind of representative government. And that representative government requires the citizen, the elected, to agree that they want to participate. We at Voatz have built a mobile application, and we believe the only secure way to do this is based on a mobile application for Android and iOS platforms that are capable of allowing the consumer to be verified, to be added to the list of eligible voters, to receive their ballot, to mark it, and to sign it and return it into a blockchain in a more secure manner than anything else we've seen. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing with the antagonists in the marketplace. Let's kind of dive into it and start where we began, which is what security needed to be. And we began with a securities first principle, and we looked at three parts of the conversation. We looked at the device, the platform where the work would be done. We looked at the network, the environment that that work would have to live within. And we looked at this thing called the ballot and how do we secure it, make it immutable, record it in a distributed manner, and make sure that it is anonymous yet eligible. And all of those things had to get baked into our design. And as we began to design this thing, we looked at different communities. And we have served all of the communities with the exception of the last one in the work that we have done. Political parties, both the Democratic and the Republican parties, national governments. If you consider the Guaidó government in Venezuela a national government, we have acted on their behalf. Professional associations, and in there I'm going to include unions, I'm going to include churches where you're electing vestries. And when I say national governments, I do also include the United States, where we participated in the presidential election. The idea is to build a single application, and the idea is founded on some basic concepts. That number one, remote requires a more efficient channel than paper across a global environment. And our first focus was on the military who were overseas and the expats who were not at their chosen country because they were working abroad or working on a ship like we are doing in the Philippines. We wanted to increase turnout and we wanted to increase engagement by making it something familiar, a device that we use every day that too many of us have become so attached to that we will never put it down. We wanted to reduce the dependence on the world of the post office, and I'm going to include in that world paper. And we wanted to take the idea that unions and politicians could change the nature and the control of those environments. We wanted to dramatically reduce the cost of serving the community, and we wanted to build it on military-grade intelligence. So what did we do to solve the problem? Number one, we addressed the question of verification. We're going to take your driver's license, your national ID card. We were in Estonia, would be looking on their national identity card. Here in the United States, we're stuck with the driver's license, which is not yet electronic, and we're stuck with the passport that is electronic, but then through driver's license and a few passports, why do you want to get to the NFC? So not today. Authentication, both the device, the physical thing with a piece of hardware in it that we can store secrets within, and the biometric that attaches that individual who owns that device to it. We wanted to create an anonymity, and this thing called an NFT, a non-fungible token. Imagine that being given to you at the moment that you are deemed to be eligible and requesting the right. At that moment, we give you an anonymous token. From that moment forward, everything you do is associated with that anonymous token, and the identity is known only to you. Okay? You're the only one who can match it to your name. And then use this thing called the blockchain, the distributed ledger, the hash chain. And one of the people who educated me on cryptography, David Shom, used to talk to me about the impregnability of a digital signature, and how if we could build digital signatures into our world, we would have impregnable contracts. So I'm sitting there going, well, great, Nimit, you've kind of grabbed hold of the world and you've done it simultaneously in an application that makes sense to me, who has been an expat and who has two children living in England, never lived in the United States, with the right to vote here in the United States. And then all those military, hundreds of thousands of people in Europe, they should have the right to vote if they have the right to fight. And that became Nimit's target audience. And as he looked at that target audience, he tried to figure out, how do I make it work? And we said, let's start with the legislature. Let's start with the election officials who run the election. And let's ask them to help us render their ballot into an electronic style that can be presented on a device. Let's make sure that they define who is eligible and what the criteria is for determining eligibility. And let's make sure that we offer them mechanisms that are military grade. And let's then send an invitation to load the application. So once they receive that invitation, they go and do what they used to do every day when they want to load a new game, a new banking application, a new social media mechanism, a new messaging application that we're using to communicate with people in all sorts of countries with VPNs as we look at our great world that needs more democracy. So you download it. We lock that application up so that we know what the platform is that sits underneath it, and we know where we've stored the secret in a secure way that binds that piece of hardware to the service. And then we ask you to register. Present your identity card. Let us validate using high-tech techniques the identity card. And coming out of the printing industry, where I printed driver's license, I printed payment cards, we produce passports. The techniques exist to do that digital verification. The TSA is using all of that stuff. And now you've verified yourself with a biometric that it is you that's present, so I bound you to the device and the device to the service so that I can make sure that only you cast a ballot, and you receive your ballot and you use your screen to mark your ballot. And if you have an accessibility problem, and this is a big deal, if you have an accessibility problem, you use the tools on your device, not the tools on the election official's device, who couldn't care less about anybody else but the people in his party. So let's make sure that we put accessibility as one of the building blocks underneath how do we ask them to mark, sign, and submit their ballots. And how do we sign? We use a digital signature, going back to my conversations with David Schoen, only associated with that anonymous ID. And then we bind it with all the cryptography that exists that can be made and shall be made quantum resistance. So where are we in terms of implementation? We've got 1.9 million people in this world who have voted using this application. We have served 87 successful elections, and we have not had one single attack. And let me draw you back to that one single attack. When we did Venezuela for the Guaido government, and I know I'm not pronouncing his name correctly, if Rosalind, if you want to help me with the names, and we had the Maduro government sitting there watching. Well, guess what? They had a whole bunch of hackers shipped in from places like St. Petersburg and Moscow, whose job it was to disrupt this election, that this government that wasn't the government that the Russians believed should be there. And we were able to withstand all of those attacks. And we've got people who believe in us, who have invested in what we're trying to do. So the other thing that's going on, and sorry, I pushed this thing twice, so it shouldn't have done that, which means I'm drawing to the close. Let me go back a second, give me a second. Technology got ahead of me. Well, I've got to ignore that particular slide. That particular slide was a bunch of firsts, and Rosalind, I'll make sure there is a PDF available to the community at the end of this presentation. And it was a bunch of firsts. We were the first in a US presidential election. We were the first in the 2018 midterm elections. We were the first in an international election, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, in terms of technologies, et cetera. But in conclusion, what we've done is we've taken military grade security. We've built a system that's designed for tabulation at speed. We've increased participation, and we've created an environment that is fully auditable. And this idea of an audit is an important concept, because how do you, what do you, how should it be constructed, who should be there, who should sign, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, gets complicated. Our solution was simple. Anybody has the right to audit. You just have to take the appropriate online course to make sure you know how to use the tools, a mere 10 to 15 minutes, and you can be an auditor. So that's kind of where I am with my discussion, and I look forward to an open dialogue.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Philip. That was really interesting. So we had like 3 really different presentations from 3 really different pieces of software, and you guys all do pretty different things in the spectrum. So I'd like to open this up to people who want to participate and have questions. You can either raise your hand in the with the reactions, or you can enter a question in the chat if you prefer, and I'll read out the question if you prefer to do it that way. It's up to you. I do know that Pierre Norbeck, if he's here, wanted to say a few words. He said he might get cut off. Is that you, Pierre? Or is that Neil? Never mind, we have Neil. I think Pierre isn't here, but Neil, if you're ready to go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm with the direct democracy movement in the UK. So obviously our prime driver is direct democracy, and obviously digital tools fall into that. There are a number of issues, obviously, in terms of the security that, has been heavily covered there, thankfully, which is interesting, because the Swiss, for instance, who obviously they're semi-direct democracy country, the only real one that does it at the full national level for a long time, since 1848. But what's interesting is they've stopped doing e-voting, okay, the last couple of years. So it'd be very interesting, Philip, maybe, I don't know if you could explain a bit more about if you've spoken to the Swiss or whatever, but they've been using this for quite some time, and they've curtailed it in the last couple of years for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, we're very interested on the direct democracy side. So I think all of those presentations tonight were first class from our point of view, and understanding it for the UK. Kadri, I thought that was very interesting what you had to say. Very interesting, because obviously it's being used and being developed, and the same obviously for all of these systems. So on the security side, we do have our concerns. So it was interesting to hear tonight, and Philip, maybe you could explain a bit more in particular, because there have been a lot of questions about the US elections or whatever, and obviously you say you have been very successful in that. But there's a book I was just reading recently was Democracy Hacked. So in terms of that military grade and all the rest of it, but then you're up against military grade opposition, and that's all fine, but who does the counting? That's always the question, isn't it, in the end? So how do we protect against, or but let people know that this system is better than the paper one, because people are actually obviously quite worried about digital stuff. So what's the way forward with explaining to people that this security is very, very high grade and is better than the randomness of people doing it in a local church or wherever else they go to vote?
Rosalind, I think I need to start the answer to that question, if I'm not mistaken.
Go ahead.
Let's start with Switzerland. I have dual nationality, so I'm both an American and a Swiss, so it makes it kind of interesting that I can talk about Switzerland on an international discussion. Switzerland took on a system built by one of our competitors a number of years ago, and required that the software be posted online. And the software was posted online, and a set of academics started reading through the software, and they found an issue. And they decided that they had to tell the world. And what I understand about professors is there is a publish or perish axiom that lives within their chosen profession. So they published. And the company that was on the other side of that review of their implementation got a little bit arrogant in how they responded, and the Swiss decided to pull it back. Where are they right now? Swiss Post took possession of the software as it was in their contract between Switzerland and our competitor, and they are currently working on addressing the bugs with the academic community that had been identified in that earlier paper. Our competitor, that particular one, went through bankruptcy proceedings and has now reemerged with the same name, but obviously with a different shareholding and management structure. So they're still out there using that same baseline software. But the classic problem of fear emerged. And let's talk about Voatz for a second. I started with Voatz in March of 2020, and Nimit, the president and co-founder, basically hired me because he and I knew each other from a prior life where we both worked in the security field in payments. And I came over without doing a lot of background research because I believed in what he was doing. And when I got there, I got the chance to read the background research. It was a paper written by a bunch of people at MIT, and it referenced significant names, for those of you who know cryptography, of a guy named Ron Rivest, the R of RSA. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I better understand this thing. So I start reading it. And what it was a bunch of PhD students had been set the quest of go break the Voatz system. And they did the reverse engineering, et cetera, and they attempted to break the system, publish a paper. They published the paper. Nimit then responded to that paper and produced a counter paper, and that paper is available on our website at voatz.com. The MIT paper is very easy to find. And like what happened to the Swiss, a group of computer scientists decided that they do not want to participate in fixing the problem. They want to only focus on being able to publish what they find when they go digging inside the software to look for a human error, because that's the fundamental concern that the academic has, is this concept called independence. Software produce expected results understand until we go inside, but we don't know it was an unexpected result. So the unexpected consequences can create fear and cause everybody to throw their hands up in the air and say, let's get away from technology. But then let's be real. We all get up in an airplane that's fly-by-wire, and we cross thousands of miles in comfort. We all wake up every morning knowing that the electrical grid is operational with all of its computers reading all of those meters everywhere around the community. So if we begin with the principle of security first, then we can solve the problem. If we begin the principle of revenue first and leave security till last, the doctors will always find something. But my plea to any PhD in this panel or in the orbit that Rosalind's going to touch, we'd rather you come to the table and work together to find the solution, because the accessible have the right. This whole ADA movement, the ability of every person to vote, no matter what their situation. I don't have any hands. I'm in a foxhole in Ukraine. I'm on the ISS, traveling around the globe. I'm on a plane, and it's a 15-hour flight, and the poll was only opened while I was in the air. All those people need to be served, and the security question is the one that belongs there, and we need the help of the community, not simply their publish or peril papers.
Okay, thanks, Philip. I know we have some more questions, and I'm going to get to in a second, but I just wanted to throw this out to Tim and Kadri as well. and ask if you share Philip's optimism or faith in the tech-based approach to elections, or if you see the challenges more seriously than he does. And then adding into that, he touched on the issue also of accessibility. I mean, for people living with disability, but also potentially for people who just aren't in their country when a vote is called, for example, or a referendum is called. What are your views on this, and can we ever make voting electronically or participating electronically safe enough that people have faith in that? So I don't know if Kadri, you want to start, or if Tim, you want to start, but I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this particular issue as well. And then we'll get on to the other question.
Yeah, I may start. I share the optimism of electronic voting as speaking from I'm speaking from this Estonian ground, or our case. In Estonia, electronic voting is really popular. We have used it like this is really common thing to do in Estonia. We have built up a little bit differently. We have all the people in Estonia who are when they are born, then they will get personal identification code. And when they are at least 15 years old, then they will get ID card, which gives them identification. And for us, electronic voting is something really common. It's of course we are quite a new nation. We have been independent now more than 30 years after gaining independence, but our government took this really technological favors, and yeah, I mean, here it works, and I couldn't find the last election statistics, but 2019 43.8, so like a little bit less than half of the participants voted over the internet in Estonia. So I mean, here I can say that here it works very well.
You are the poster child.
Tim, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. So I'll preface by saying, the blockchain or, intense security issues aren't going to be my personal area of expertise. Like Philip, obviously with his presentation dwarfs my knowledge by a long shot. And what you're doing, Philip, is really inspiring, especially your stories about like making sure that, veterans or people currently in combat who are deployed, are able to participate in elections. Like that's awesome for democracy. I think the perspective that I would bring is just that like no system is going to be perfect. There's going to be trade-offs in any system. So like, as we've seen in the last couple elections in the United States, like the accusations of voter fraud are happening with current systems as well, right? And there's spoiled ballots. There's all sorts of accessibility challenges with any system. And I think that it's just one of those things where ongoing due diligence always needs to be an important concern. So for example, there needs to always be a risk analysis of, what is our accessibility challenge with one system versus another? What's our security challenge with one system versus another? And so it's like, for me, I share the optimism, and it's probably never kind of a fixed, for me, it's not like a fixed kind of determined approach. It's more of understanding, where are we at in terms of like right now, in terms of our risk of any sort of disruption, on a digital system versus a paper system. And yeah, even on a paper system, is it 100% paper, or is there actually is technology involved in those systems as well? And so like there needs to be a full understanding analysis of all that. But I really agree that there is so much opportunity as we move to digital approaches in these processes for including more and more people. And I don't have the expertise in the voting area, but from the citizen engagement on key issues, amount of clients I've seen have skyrocketing participation rates. It's just so encouraging, and just the opportunity to see more and more people who wouldn't traditionally be able to get involved. Like those are the signs of flourishing democracy from my perspective. So yeah, and I guess just to share, I have a very different use case, and so we have a very different security approach. Like in terms of like our system hardening and making sure things like, you know, DDoS attacks and data security, like all that needs to be there. But we actually take a very different perspective in terms of what participation looks like. We're all about barrier reduction upfront, so as many people can participate as possible. And then we're all about adding intelligence to our administrators to be able to do things like deduplication, et cetera. And it is a very different scenario, because just like, you know, you go to a voting booth, there's going to be a lot of security around, are you a valid voter? Like that was the start of Philip's presentation. You show up to a town hall meeting, no one's looking at your ID to make sure you live in the community, right? There is more of an inherent level of trust. So it is a very different scenario, but I think that the principles are the same, like looking at what is the disadvantage of losing out on people's participation based on using old methods versus new ones, and then what are the risks? And then those things always have to be weighed.
Great. No, thanks, Tim. Okay, we have another question from Matt. You should be unmuted.
You
Yeah.
hear me? You guys hear me okay? All right, great, cool. Hi, my name is Matt Ingalls. My first question is it okay if I record this? I can't hear you.
Right, I'm sorry. It's being recorded by the festival, so they'll probably put it online afterwards on YouTube or something. So they're recording it.
Okay, cool.
Access it from there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right, nice, very nice. And my question was what do the three panelists or anyone else that has anything else to add to this? What do y'all think about recalls in addition to citizen referendums and citizen initiatives?
I'll start and say that if I had my dream, and because I said I was a Swiss citizen, and when Neil, you talked about the Switzerland being one of the few countries that approaches something that resembles real democracy, I would love that the Voatz app on a periodic basis, and let the voter decide or let the community decide, receives a ballot. And on that ballot are a bunch of questions. And I, the citizen, get asked questions before the representative votes.
Sorry, can you clarify yourself there a bit, Philip? I just wondered, do you mean you, the citizens, the constituents vote first, and that influences how the representative votes, or?
It could dictate, depending on the rules that we, the community, decide to establish. But I would like to get to the point that we truly get to a true democracy, like in Switzerland, where a change to the law is not done by some representative who's going to lunch with some lobbyist, but is done by me, the people. And I would suggest we, the people, being the preamble to our Constitution, kind of wanted to take us there. But the reality is you need a representative body. Even Switzerland recognizes you need a representative body because it's a big problem to manage. And I wouldn't want to be sitting there having to vote on should we send missiles to Ukraine. I'd rather my representative body do that. But I'd sure as hell like to be able to participate in should we have a $757 billion defense budget.
Okay, great. Interesting. Now, Kadri, you guys basically do kind of proposals and initiatives. So kind of like citizen initiated proposals that then go to Parliament. So can you explain exactly how that works, especially what happens when they get to Parliament? Because as I understood it, you had a system, people can go online, they can sign a petition online, and then that goes to the Parliament. What happens at that point? Like, is there a debate in Parliament, or is there a referendum, or how does that work?
Yeah. It's written in a law that the people who are like representatives of the ones who put their signatures, they have a right to participate in a discussion, which there is a certain timeline where a parliamentary committee has to make invite the people over, and then they will have this discussion around the same table. The people who come there, they explain why, what they are concerns, what are their they see what the possible solutions may be. And then actually also we have in Parliament, there is written in law 6 possible solutions what committee can decide. One thing is that they change some law or regulation. When it falls out of their scope, then they can direct it to some ministry to research it more. They can make they can make send it to the whole Parliament, like the full house hearing for this topic. So there are like different options how this can be solved. And yeah, and it depends from the topic how then the parliamentary committee decides to proceed with this.
Great, thanks. Tim, did you want to jump in on that one, or?
Sure. The thing that Philip said that really resonated with me was there's certain decisions that, like, I as a citizen want to have my vote counted in and my voice in, and there's other ones that I want my government to make. I thought that was a really great point. But as we think about both of those different types of decisions, I think the area that civil space that we're focusing on is like well before the kind of end game of a plebiscite or a referendum, or what was the other one, a recall. I think about our focus is on what are the smaller interactions on issues that would probably create a healthier kind of discourse and transparent and collaborative, even co-design government process. That, not saying that there's always necessarily some sort of negative reason or outcome that would come about a referendum. I think it's a trigger word in Canada because we had the referendum on Quebec separating back when I was a teenager from the country. So there's some negativity attached to it, but I do believe in this idea of like, there's certain places where it's really important to provide citizens with decision-making power. Like participatory budgeting is a really fantastic example of places where we can even kind of incrementally experiment with giving more and more decision-making power to citizens in certain areas and test and see how that goes and then iterate that process over time. It's not like an all or nothing thing, right? You can give bits and pieces of decision-making power. And I think that's really powerful and great, but where civil space focuses is actually far before that. And that essentially it's in this place of saying, well, you know what, citizens, they need to be able to speak into, their city or their state or province or region issues much earlier on. And so then instead of wanting to, boot a province out or recall a politician, there's actually been this collaborative approach to things from the get-go. And it can be as simple as like understanding key priorities, key concerns, allowing citizens to post and having other citizens interact with that feedback. So you start understanding where there's momentum and consensus and ideas. And like, that's where we've like really tried to focus. Is it's almost that like early prevention medicine. Like we have a great story from a Louisiana-based government, and they actually had a big challenge where they had a bond vote go sour. Like it was voted negative, like no. I think it had to do with a police station redevelopment. And the reason in kind of the postmortem was because they hadn't gone out and done that type of like community engagement, understanding key priorities, revising and showing the public where revisions had been made to policy and approach because of what they've heard. And so whether it's a solution like cadres or whether it's a solution like civil space, depending on where you're at kind of in the process, that idea of before it gets to that, kind of like end game, big picture, in or out kind of decision making, or even like citizens making a final call on this piece. Well, where can we get more creative earlier in the process, factor in more understanding of like the actual issues facing diverse groups of citizens, and hopefully factor that into the policy so it has a chance to meet broader need. And instead of then it having to be a this way or that way or yes or no, and only some of the, the population is going to be really happy with it, can we do a better job at engaging our communities early in like qualitative, quantitative sense? And so, yeah, I think all the parts are important in the process. And that's the one that we see that we can target and make a difference in.
Okay, great. So I think, Jonathan, you had a question. You were next in line. Yep.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So my name is Jonathan Victory. I'm in the Republic of Ireland, and there's definitely a sense here of a disconnect between how the government acts and what the needs of citizens are. And I was, it kind of made me struck by Tim using the expression "our friends in government" when he was talking about like the rollout of sort of these digital democracy platforms. And I think in rolling them out, there was kind of two groups you would need buy-in from. One is the government and how they would incorporate this, or how would they actually act on what the citizens were saying rather than using it for like box ticking. So how do you actually sort of steer the institutions of governments towards more of this direct digital democracy direction? If you could each speak to your national contexts about how that's going. And then the second thing is about how you would influence the public and citizens to actually engage with these, because I even find in trying to explain these concepts to people, like how you can get this across succinctly that this is a good opportunity for people to participate in the political process. So in each of your experiences, do you find that like when these platforms get going, does word of mouth spread about more people wanting to get involved in these, or how would you get more of the public involved in digital democracy stuff as well?
Jonathan, you got a lot of good questions there. I'd love to answer them, like some really good insights. So the way that we try to address this at Civil Space is we try to really understand at the forefront of really amazing citizen engagement. And it's often through innovative partners who are doing a fantastic job at partnering with government. It's often like agencies and groups who are like been doing this for 30 years. And by meeting and understanding like how they're trying to be more inclusive, how they're trying to create processes that close the loop back to citizens and show them how there's actually change being made because of what has been heard, and then factoring in those into our training and into our software as nudges has been kind of the game changer for us. So it's really understanding, well, this is maybe like what a box ticking exercise would be. This is what like really good ongoing throughout a project's process looks like. How can we bake that more into the software and push, encourage, nudge, help our clients along? So yes, we say they're our friends, I guess, because they're our customers, but also because we believe that, like, especially at local government level, like so much good can be done if there is that right motivation. And so there's always going to be that matter of like, is there that philosophical alignment? And often for our customers, they're approaching us because there is like kind of a buy-in to that best practice approach. But I guess for me, then it's about how can we also make it so those individuals who have maybe good intentions, but have challenge with follow through, how do we make it so that we are able to automate and help them? Because often time, resources get in the way of well-intentioned government officials doing an actual good job or following through on what they should. And so for us, like automating things like translation, automating things like community safety and moderation and collaborative activities, automating things like publishing reports back and insights back to citizens so they can see where they fit with the rest of citizens, like making all that easier is one of our answers. Like we're not trying to, I guess, change the, we're not trying to evangelize and try to change the hearts of people who don't want them to be changed right now. But we're saying, you know what, there are good people, but who haven't necessarily have all the knowledge or all the time or resources. How can we help channel their hopes and make that and use our expertise and bake that into software to help them do a better job? But as a citizen, that was a great question you asked. To me, one of your roles can be to hold government accountable to showing where there is an impact because of these systems. So it's like, so you ran this engagement about our priorities. So you asked for our feedback about this potential legislation. What happened? And so like, we always try to bake in these like stages in projects where government is reporting back on those things. But in the end, it's up to them. And I would say as a citizen, it's, maybe the feedback is, it's great that you did X. How are we going to see what you did with the information that I provided you? How can I see the information that's been provided? And hopefully that is, hopefully that's there. And then you asked one more question of like, how does participation get spread? Have we seen participation spread when these platforms are introduced? And one thing I always say to potential clients who are interested in adopting some of these approaches, who are concerned about, is anyone actually going to show up, is I can tell them the stories of different clients who had 10 times the experience they expected in terms of participation. But the advice I often give is start, do best practice when you do it, but start with an issue that really matters to people, that people are going to show up for anyways. Is it the casino that's really, kind of a concern amongst people in the community? Or is it like kind of the waterfront development? Or is it the bike lanes that are taking away, commuter drivers, traffic, like things that are more hot button that people really want to weigh in on, that are really important to them? Those are opportunities to introduce people to say, hey, we already know you're looking at our website, you're checking out social media on these issues. We're going to draw you into our kind of democracy space where we're going to communicate all the information we have, where we're going to get information from you, and then we're going to show you what we learned from that process. And then once citizens engage on that initiative, sharing out to other people, seeing where they can get involved next on other issues, that tends to snowball. So I would just say, do it the right way, follow best practices, but also start with an issue that really matters to citizens. And then that's how you can tend to get initiatives going. So thanks for your questions, by the way.
Okay, I'm going to kind of gather a few things together, because there's some people who've submitted questions on the chat and some people who want to speak. So I'm just going to kind of bundle all of that. So first on the chat, Thor from Australia says that a lot of voters don't have the time or interest to be involved in deciding on their voting position on a bill. And he asks, what approach or mechanism have people thought about to count the votes of those people? So I think what we're getting at here is, would you count people who haven't participated in a certain sense? Or how can you represent the people who don't show up? I think if Thor is talking about what I think he's talking about, I would say I did a kind of vote platform thing with Othello when I ran for election here. And it was great. It was really, really well. We had more participation from like women than there were in the parliament, for example. But we had, if I remember correctly, more men named John participated than like women did, or than like some minorities did. So even though I personally really made an effort, like I did it, so I know what I did. I made an effort to target, women to participate as well. I made effort to try to target visible minorities to participate as well in my community. However, they were still outweighed by a long shot by the typical voter, I suppose, or the typical person who would also be coming to a town hall meeting in our area, which would be probably like a kind of a middle-aged guy, right? So the question is, should those people be more encouraged to participate, and should they be more encouraged to participate? I mean, this is a question I think as well too. I mean, maybe, hey, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Like you do have to also bring something from your side and say, I've showed up to participate. So I always feel in two minds about this myself. I'm never quite sure what the right answer is, and I'd be interested in hearing your guys' perspective on that as well. Like, what does it mean to be inclusive in this sense, right? And however, also at the same time, democratic. And then also Stephen had a question as well. So we'll kind of bundle that in there so we can get them all done still in our time. And you can answer whichever ones you want to.
I would say, should every portion of the population be encouraged to participate? Absolutely, yes.
Sorry, I think Stephen's just jumping in here, and then we'll go. Sorry,
Apologies.
No, I'm sorry. It was my.
Thank you. Sorry, just a bit like Neil, I'm also involved in the direct democracy movement in the UK. We have a website, dd2024.org, if you're free to have a look at it. One of the things that we've got in the UK is this idea of petitions. And if you reach 100,000 petitions, then that's then discussed normally by a committee. But the reality is, all they really do is kick it around and do absolutely nothing about it at all. So there's no participation by the electorate in between the 4 or 5 years that you have elections. And obviously that's the sort of thing that we ideally would like to see changed, and maybe digital democracy is one way of doing it. But one thing that does concern people is the whole ability to hear both sides of the argument, the for and against. And I'm just wondering, in Estonian, and maybe the other two presenters as well, how do you overcome Facebook and people with plenty of money trying to sway people with a lot of information? In the UK, we have had Brexit, and we had a case where the government were able to spend £9 million distributing leaflets to every house on one side of the argument. Now, fortunately, from my perspective, the government lost, and the people had their say to leave the EU. But I'm just wondering what your experience is in other countries. How do you ensure that the people who are going to vote do actually hear the for and against arguments?
So let me give you an example of, I think, the first question that came into the conversation, which is, how do we engage and support the person who doesn't take that much interest? And if we talk to that person, our thought is, if we reduce the amount of time you waste standing in line and going through the process, and we think about big cities, and I'm a New York, London, Brussels person who's had to deal with large size communities. You're sitting there going, if I can do that from the comfort of my home, and Matt, please stop rocking. I'm getting seasick. If I could do that from the comfort of my home, I have my research tools in front of me, and I can take advantage of those research tools while I have the back in front of me, and I can process the work. So that's the answer, which is, let their time at their pace, not on our schedule where we want them to. So that's number one. Number two, we worked with the Utah Republican Party during their primary processes where they caucus. They had the greatest participation during the COVID session than they had ever had at a caucus before, because we did it remotely using the Voatz app to vote. The response we got back when we asked people to try to understand what had happened, I didn't have to drive for 2 hours to get to the convention, spend the night at the hotel, and then drive back. I spent those 4 hours in the night at the hotel doing my homework. So let's give the citizen the time to do their homework so they can participate in the voting process. Tim and our Kadita, I'm going to mess it up again. I'm not going to try. Talk about how do you engage about the topics. And then we had the question from Stefan, how do we deal with the media and the problems of social media? And it reminds me of something that happened in this country, which is a shame, which is when we eliminated the fair doctrine principle, which required a media outlet to guarantee the equal time to every voice. And we decided in 1989 to remove that particular responsibility. And now we have the news that we now have, which is, if you want to be left, you go read the left news. If you want to be right, you go read the right news. But if you don't read the other side, you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, to dovetail off of that, like the theme I heard there, Philip, was like barrier reduction. I think like that's when I think about what participation looks like. Often there's the experience. We can talk all about accessibility, but there's also the education side. Like for someone to understand the issue, that may be a barrier. And so are we actually doing the work to say, I want to translate my materials. I'm going to create short videos. I'm going to create infographics. I'm going to create consumable charts, graphs, summaries, instead of just firing people off to 184-page PDF that they expect them to read through. You know what I mean? Like that shouldn't be the binary. There should be an opportunity for people to get up to speed on issues in ways that are that are going to be more accessible. Because if you're really looking for, people who have a finite amount of time to be able to get up to speed quick enough and be able to provide feedback on issues that matter, you have to find a way, instead of just saying, well, they're not participating, you have to find a way to lower barriers, both in the participatory mechanisms, but also on the content. And they shouldn't have to hunt for it. And so to me, these are like not easy things. They all cost time and money, but they're principles that are really easy to embrace the idea of and say, yeah, we want to make sure that if people want to learn about this affordable housing that's coming to our community, we're going to make it so they can understand everything we've done so far. They can understand why we've made the decisions we have, and they can understand what we're asking for now and how we're going to use that information, and make that so abundantly clear as part of the citizen engagement process. And then I think there's also a really great question about different perspectives, and I think sometimes it's like, it's not even always two, it can be more than two, but often if the government has a perspective or approach, I think just the openness to acknowledge, like, we have heard, this dissent, or we know these are these other opinions, like to actually put that out there and speak to why the direction that is being proposed, or why decisions have been made. It's just, I think more transparency is important, and more openness and even vulnerability to saying, hey, this is what we're proposing. This is what we've also heard from the community. We're still at the process where we're hearing from citizens, hearing from the community, weigh in with all kind of that in place. I think those are like maybe some more momentous steps that cities can take. And if they're really committed to that idea of, or states or whatever, if we're really committed to that idea of, we want to really collaborate and co-design futures with our citizens.
Great, thanks guys. Okay, so we only have 5 more minutes before we will be cut off, as far as I understand the rules. So we have a chance for one very quick lightning round, if you can be very, very quick, which is, what's stopping local and federal governments, a question from Nick Norman, what's stopping local and federal governments from adopting electronic voting systems?
I would suggest, and I think it's to what Tim and Kadri were talking about, is the biggest problem is the inherent desire of those in power to maintain power. And the biggest problem I've heard with electronic voting is, I didn't get voted that way last time, so I'm afraid of change.
Those are definitely true. I think one of the biggest things, if voting in more in my perspective, or my use case, is less about like, picking a candidate for a job, but even like making my voice heard. I think one of the biggest challenges is representation. So feeling like, is the sample that is coming out of this actually representing the community well? Or is it representing people who always traditionally have had power, or people who are more available, or people who are, more educated, people who are not necessarily younger or older, people who are kind of in the middle, who are more technology proficient. And so I guess what I would say is, I think that one of our biggest gaps to address in considering adoption of digital decision-making on all fronts is just continuing to, it's like what I started with this whole conversation with. It's like continuing to find ways to tear down the barriers for participation, whether it's accessibility or inclusivity, continuing to go out there and listen, even not just, fire off the technology and hope it works, but are we even are we getting out there with prototypes and iterations and really hearing not only what the results are, but what the experience was, so that we can continue to make those experiences better, more barrier-free, and more inclusive.
So Kadri, obviously in your country, it's kind of
the other way around.
I can say like that. There's in Estonia, there's no reasons which are stopping local and federal government adopting electronic voting systems, because it works. Here we have when there are elections, then we have electronic voting, and of course we have also hybrid that the ones who want to go to the ballot and put their paper vote, they can do it as well. But I think that the core thing is also the trust in technology and how government and people trust each other. And I think that in an Estonia case, we have within these years how we government and the country has developed. We have built in our DNA, this trust to technology and trust to each other through this communication through these means.
Okay, well, I'd like to say thanks to all of our panelists for coming here today. I know you're from all over the world, so thanks for taking the time to do this and to share experiences. And if any of you who've come want to take up contact with them further, I'm sure you can. They have web pages. You can, educate yourselves a little bit more about this as well. Although I know that a lot of people in the audience today actually are people who are running, digital campaigns in the countries they're from, are really engaged in this kind of work as well in their home countries. So it's really, really great that we could all come together. Thanks also for all of you contributing and asking your questions and taking part here. And also, I really want to thank the Imagine Belfast Festival as well. They've always, for 3 years running, or I think more now, we've always been able to have an event with them offline or online, and they always devote an entire day just to doing democracy. So they've really always been there making a big effort to promote democracy. And I'm sure this video will be available on their page after the event. So if any of you want to go and find it after the event, you'll be able to find it there and share the link from that. So, and that, I guess we can close. We have about 30 seconds left. We can close. And I think for me here in Ireland, anyway, enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rosalind.
Thanks. Bye.